above 5,700 this Tuesday morning. We're now up by 1 7/10% at 5,707.80. That is, of course, extending the gains that we saw on Monday morning, reversing those losses from last Friday's trading. Now, this, amid all of these new cases going on the novel coronavirus, we are approaching the 2 million mark, and deaths are topping around 118,000. That is as of last night. But we also have some, bright spots here. For example, cases or new infections at least slowing down, or the rate of new infections slowing down in New York, in Spain, and also in some parts of Europe. And still a lot of questions, however, on the restrictions of lockdowns and whether these should be extended, whether these should be partially lifted. You've got, for instance, in France, they've extended the nation's lockdown to as far as May 11. Now, recall that, as I mentioned, these 5,700 levels are extending the gains that we saw yesterday. We already broke the 5,600 level yesterday, and we also were best performing bourse compared to the rest of our Asian peers. Now, one thing to note, however, is that the net foreign selling is still persisting, and you can see here basically, bars of red throughout the year to date, basically. And this has been persisting for the 19th straight day since at least as of yesterday. A lot of analysts saying that what is buoying our local bourse right now are really our local investors. And even across Asia, you can see that emerging market ETFs have suffered an eighth week of outflows here, even as the pace of withdrawals has now been easing. So still a very strong, showing here that there is a flight to safe haven. So far this year, the outflows from emerging market ETFs have totaled $8.5 billion. Now, just a quick peek at our sectors here. I was just taking a quick look at it. Recall, we are 1 hour into the trading day, and you can see most sectors in the green, save for one that is sitting out this rally, and that is properties, which is sliding down a touch by 0.2%. But still, you can see mining and oil here, the best performer, now being replaced by financials as the best performer, both increasing by 3% together with services, industrials, and holding firms. Now, speaking of financials, this has been one sector that has been in focus very much, especially with all of the new stimulus in place that the BSP has been announcing. And in fact, this is what Phil Stocks' Japet Tantiangco had mentioned yesterday, was what was propping up the optimism in our local bourse. He did mention that the climb, which happened towards the end of the trading day yesterday, was due to the fact that the economic stimulus programs, both from the fiscal and monetary side, were announced, and that gave more clarity that both the fiscal and monetary policy have been working together. Now, recall that yesterday we had also announced that Benjamin Diokno, the BSP central bank governor, said that it is looking at deeper rate cuts, so might be going down to below 3%, which is our all-time record low here in the Philippines. But you've got Nomura saying that despite all of these measures, the Philippines has been lagging behind our Asian peers when it comes to fiscal stimulus. They said that we've fallen behind our neighbors, and they are looking or calling additional 75 basis points cut that will all be happening in the second quarter. Now, recall that the next policy meeting is still on May 21, and they're calling a 50 basis points cut, possibly even before then. Recall that BSP Governor Ben Diokno did mention they're very open to having off-cycle cuts. Another warning, apart from Nomura, is ING's Nicky Mapa. He's saying that the lockdown will remain key to easing the lockdown, rather, will remain key for the economic activity. He said that banks can keep lending, keep giving liquidity, but at the end of the day, people need to spend, and people need to be able to go out and spend. So this is still a big question there. Will all of this monetary stimulus result into more spending? And that is something that we are closely watching out for, especially as consumer stocks continue to take the lead. I'm going to just go back to our boards here, but you're going to be seeing that stocks like Jollibee and Pure Gold have been leading the charge as of recent weeks. These have been stocks that have been favored by our analysts, especially given that Pure Gold, for example, is very into the staples here. But still, there are some analysts, for instance, Christina Ulang of First Metro Securities, saying that a V-shaped recovery, at least in spending, is unlikely. So she does say that even if the restrictions, so for example, the lockdown is lifted, the behavior of consumers has still changed dramatically and will remain wary without a vaccine. So it's not as if we're just all going to go out there and start spending. Another very interesting part is what Rachel Cruz of AP Securities is saying. Now there's a lot of shifting from simple retailers to more staple goods. So pure play, supermarkets, and these are the ones that are being, let's say, bought up. And Tessie C. Coson has also, she's of course chairman of SM, she's saying that she does feel this pinch in terms of retailers. She says that they will miss their 2020 retail sales target, although she is hopeful on a second half rebound, especially as consumption picks up. So a lot of things going on. Just a very quick peek at your best performers here. Apart from the consumer stocks I've mentioned, you've got ICTSI up by 8.3%. Their sister company Bloomberry, also another Razon stock, is up by more than 5%. Incidentally, they've also just announced that they are going to be looking into investments, possibly, also gaming, which they're already in, and also hospitality, but also possibly non-gaming. So we'll be watching out for that. But as I mentioned, you've still got the property space in the red right now, dragged down by Ayala Land, which is the moment's worst performer as of 10:40 this morning. So more on markets later on. Meanwhile, let's check in on other headlines we're watching this Tuesday. Okay, let's kick off with some good news for the micro, small, and medium-sized business sector. The government is providing an additional or up to 50 billion peso of a lifeline for these small businesses. This is from Finance Secretary Sonny Dominguez. He has told reporters that this move will allow small businesses to subsidize their workers' wages. Now, Dominguez adds that the fund will be used to assist MSMEs through a loan guarantee program. Now, in a separate interview which the Finance Secretary had with CNN Philippines, he mentioned that the financial assistance for MSMEs could be worth within 35 to 50 billion pesos. Now, currently, the DOF documents show that only 35 billion pesos out of the 1.17 trillion peso funding program is allotted to assist employees of these small businesses. Dominguez estimates that about 3.5 million workers are employed by MSMEs. Now, the Asian Development Bank has tripled its rescue package for member countries affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, from $6.5 billion, the total coronavirus relief package is now at $20 billion. Now, aside from the expanded COVID-19 war chest, the multilateral lender also approved a $5 million grant for the Philippines earlier this month. That's to aid in food supply. You'll also be seeing in your screens here that the ADB also rolled out a separate $3 million relief fund, and that's to help with government response to the pandemic. Now, the government is still expecting a $150 million additional funding, that's from ADB, for its conditional cash transfer program and a $1 billion support loan package. Meanwhile, the World Bank also released a $500 million loan for the Philippines as the confirmed cases inches near the 5,000 mark here in the country, casualties climbing to over 300. And the government is set to scale down its domestic borrowing a bit as more foreign loans are expected to fill in the funding for this COVID-19 response. The Bureau of the Treasury says the revised borrowing mix could now range between 70 to 30 and 72 to 28, still in favor of local lenders. So the Treasury says this is to minimize the foreign exchange risks and volatility. You'll be seeing on your screens here the new, let's say, mix compared to before. Now, for this month alone, the Treasury plans to borrow 190 billion pesos. That's from the local market through a mix of short-term and long-term government bonds. Now, for foreign loans, the government is looking at some $300 billion from multilaterals to partially fund its 1.17 trillion economic package. The government's borrowing target is still set at 1.4 trillion pesos. Okay, now with the novel coronavirus victimizing close to 2 million people and government resources running thin, the private sector has pitched in. We will have more on that with our guest from Multisys after this short break. Stay with us. Good morning. You're back watching Business World Live. You can see on my terminals here. Let's do a quick peek on how global markets are performing. You're going to be seeing on the top of your screens here how the U.S. markets performed overnight, which was largely mixed, with the Dow down together with the S&P 500, but the Nasdaq up 0.5%. Now, recall there are a lot of things in focus in the U.S. Let's start off with that. They're waiting for first quarter profit results this week. You've actually got banks and financials. They're going to be starting to report first quarter earnings. A lot of investors watching that very closely. You've also got tomorrow U.S. retail sales poised to fall for the month of March by the most ever seen in history. So something to be watching out for. And let's take it over to Asia Pac here. We are, let's say, joining the rest of the regional rally. You're going to be seeing the Topix up by 1%, and the Nikkei 225 in Japan up by a healthy 1.9%. You know, together with the Hang Seng up by 1%, and the rest of China up by 0.5% here for the Shanghai Composite, and the Shenzhen is up by more than 1%. So we are not alone in terms of this positive optimism. Another market to be watching out for the rest of the week, you've got China, because they will be releasing their GDP, industrial production, retail sales, and jobless figures on Friday. So ahead of that, still, we are nevertheless in the green. But, you know, all of these positivity still has to be taken into context. Of course, you've got the IMF recently having said that Asia, Africa, and Latin America were at higher risk, especially economically, because we have weaker health systems. We are also unable to implement as good as, let's say, other developed countries, our social distancing rules in such densely populated cities. She had said that investors have removed some $100 billion in capital from these developing economies. And this is 3 times the outflow that we've seen, or we had seen, during the same period of the global financial crisis during 2008, 2009. One other thing to be watching out for here, and I'm going to try and take that out for you, that is crude oil, because there's a lot of things going on for this commodity here. Oil prices in particular have been tracking higher. We recall that we had already slid for the WTI, at least in Texas, below $20 a barrel. It's now recovered a touch to 22.61 right now. You've got some news on that front. You've got commitment by big producers to curb the output, even as a lot of doubts remain as to whether these cuts will be enough to offset the weaker demand that we're seeing globally here. Now, some stocks to be watching out for. I just wanted to check in on some airlines here, especially as these have been in focus locally. So let's kick off with the PAL. This from a blast, let's say, from First Metro. They did mention that they will be partially lifting the travel ban on selected countries. So let's take a quick peek at PAL and how that is performing right now. Recall that they did say that when the enhanced community quarantine was extended to the end of April, that these flights would also be canceled accordingly. But they did mention they're hoping to lift the travel ban, at least for selected countries, as soon as possible, hoping for around May 2020. And where are they going to start kicking off? First of all, they're hoping for a few weekly flights to Japan, China, Hong Kong, Taipei, Macau, the US, Canada, Guam, Australia, UK, Saudi Arabia, Singapore, Thailand, Cambodia, and South Korea, among others in the rest of Asia. So they're also planning to increase as well domestic flights in a few weeks, depending on the situation. So take a look at PAL, which is actually trading flat here. But I just wanted to highlight the year-to-date performance of our carrier, especially since it's actually down by 10.83%. If you take a look at, if you compare this to how our local bourse is performing, we are down close to 30%. It's not necessarily such a bad showing. I also wanted to take a quick peek at other fundraising activities here. You've got Aboitiz Power, for example. And this was highlighted by the SEC, or the Securities and Exchanges Commission, when they had said that capital markets are still healthy, that we may not necessarily be seeing that in terms of our equities, but at least when you take a look at fixed income and bonds, A lot are still tapping into that. And one that's showing evidence of this is Aboitiz Power. So they, despite the conditions, will be proceeding with the sale of 9.55 billion pesos worth of bonds this quarter. This is actually the fourth tranche of a 30 billion peso bond shelf that they had planned. And not only that, they've actually gotten a AAA rating from the PRS. So Aboitiz Power, take a look at that, 10% to 27 pesos and 80 centavos. Now, another one that, other companies here that have sold bonds, you've got BPI, so still tapping into the fixed income space, SM Prime, RCBC, and you've also got Megawide. And I just wanted to take a quick peek at Megawide, especially since this, is one of our key players in the construction industry. And Megawide has also approved, at least their board, preferential shares. So this is somewhere in between, let's say, fixed income and equity, and you're going to be seeing a Megawide trading at 7 pesos and 19 centavos. That is up, get this, close to 9%. So after they did announce this, or this approval of preference shares, we've got Megawide surging by close to 9% right now. I'm also going to be checking in on some mining companies. We've had, a back and forth here in terms of our miners. Especially since you've got closures happening back and forth, and also Semirara, for instance, hopeful that they would be able to resume operations. But as it stands, that's not necessarily happening very quickly. But you can be seeing some bright spots here. Apex Mining, for instance, up by 14 and 0.6%. Semirara up by 3 and 0.4%. That's despite the fact that First Metro Securities had actually downgraded them, at least their outlook. They did see that the lockdowns around the world would have pressure or downward pressure into power demand. And of course, Semirara produces coal, and the production of coal, or the volumes, is really contingent upon the demand of power needed. And they did mention that this is from First Metro, amid the COVID-19 pandemic, you saw coal prices plunging by 25.2% year to date. And this, they say, poses a huge downside risk on Semirara. So it's actually fallen to a 9-year low, at least on a couple of weeks ago on March 19, and they do recommend selling this stock. So again, let's just weigh in on the mining sector. Despite all of this negative news, they are, however, returning positively, up by 3 and 0.8% here. Now let's just do a very quick close on how we are doing in terms of our local bourse. We are still remaining above 5,700, 5741.87. That is a 2 and 0.3% jump, and that, compared to what I've shown you guys on the Asian markets, we are outperforming even the biggest and most important bourses right now. So definitely something to be happy about. And let's see whether those consumer stocks are doing well or extending the gains. Recall that Pure Gold and Jollibee had been the best performers yesterday. Take a look at that. Jollibee now surpassing ICTSI, up by 8 and 0.9%. So a lot of retailers here still enjoying those gains. I just wanted to show our viewers also our year-to-date performance. I mean, generally, we only had the two stocks, PLDT and Globe Telecom, in the positive territory. Take a look at this. Pure Gold is now up by 14 and 0.8% year to date, joining. And now we've got 3 stocks in positive territory, hoping for more of these, and especially consumption stocks on their way to joining these 3 players that remain in the green. And that's the first look into the business day this Tuesday. That's April 14, 2020. Thank you so much for watching. Catch us again 10:30 a.m. tomorrow. I'm Danny Laurel, and we are One News.